Right now, tonight, 4 astronauts are falling toward Earth at 25,000 miles per hour. In 13 minutes, they will either splash down safely in the Pacific Ocean or they will die. During re-entry, temperatures outside their capsule will reach 5,000 degrees. Their blood will pool in their legs, their vision will grey out. And for 6 straight minutes, no one on Earth will be able to reach them. But here is what no one is telling you. The heat shield is not the biggest danger. The biggest danger is what 10 days in space has already done to their bodies. Their bones have started dissolving. Their eyeballs may have changed shape. Cosmic rays have been shredding their DNA. And their hearts have already begun to shrink. This is the Artemis II crew. They just traveled farther from Earth than any human being in history. And tonight, we are going to follow the human body into every environment it was never built to survive. From the vacuum of deep space to the crushing depths of the ocean. From the acid clouds of Venus to the liquid hydrogen atmosphere of Jupiter, what we discover will change how you think about the machine you live inside. If you enjoy our calm nighttime journeys, remember to like and subscribe. We highly encourage our community to discuss the video topics in the comments and react to other comments. It is the most fun when we share our thoughts. Now, let us begin. Tonight, 4 human beings are falling back to Earth. Right now, as you listen to this, the Artemis II crew is hurtling through space at 25,000 miles per hour, inside a capsule not much bigger than a small bedroom. In a matter of hours, they will slam into the atmosphere, and a shell of superheated plasma will wrap around their spacecraft at temperatures exceeding 5,000 degrees. Their blood will pool in their legs. Their vision will begin to grey out, and for 6 straight minutes, no one on Earth will be able to reach them. But that is only the beginning of what we are going to explore tonight. Because the real story is not the mission. The real story is what space has already done to their bodies, and what it would do to yours if you went further. Over the next 2 hours, we are going to follow the human body into environments it was never built to survive. We will watch bones dissolve in zero gravity. We will feel eyeballs change shape as fluid crushes them from behind. We will descend to the bottom of the ocean where pressure turns the human body into something unrecognizable. We will stand on Venus, where you would be simultaneously crushed, incinerated, and chemically dissolved in under 10 seconds. We will drift through the atmosphere of Jupiter, sinking through hydrogen gas until the pressure liquefies the air around you. And we will ask the hardest question of all. If the human body was built for exactly one environment, one gravity, one atmosphere, one narrow band of temperature and pressure, then what happens when we try to take it somewhere else? The answer, as the Artemis II crew is about to discover, is that everything breaks. Chapter 1. The body they are betting on. Right now, tonight, April 10th, 2026, 4 astronauts are preparing for the most dangerous 13 minutes of their lives. NASA astronauts Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, are inside the Orion spacecraft, a capsule they have called home for 10 days. They launched on April 1st from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, aboard the most powerful rocket ever flown with a crew, the Space Launch System. They swung around the far side of the Moon on April 6th. They traveled 252,760 miles from Earth, farther than any human beings in history, farther than the crew of Apollo 13, who held that record for over 50 years. And now they are coming home. But coming home is not the easy part. It might be the hardest part of all. NASA Flight Director Jeff Radigan put it plainly during the final mission briefing. It is 13 minutes of things that have to go right. 13 minutes from the moment the Orion capsule hits the top of the atmosphere to the moment it splashes down in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego. During those 13 minutes, The capsule will be traveling at roughly 25,000 miles per hour. It will slam into the atmosphere and begin to slow down, and that deceleration will produce heat. Temperatures on the heat shield will exceed 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A cocoon of superheated plasma will envelop the capsule. And for approximately 6 minutes, starting at around 7:53 in the evening Eastern Time, that plasma will sever all communication between the crew and the ground. No voice, no data, no telemetry, nothing. The crew will be alone inside a fireball, and no one on Earth will know if they are alive or dead until the capsule emerges from blackout and the parachutes deploy. During re-entry, the crew will experience up to 3.9 Gs. That means a person who weighs 180 pounds will effectively weigh 700 pounds. Their blood will be pulled downward, away from their brains. First, they will lose color vision. Everything will fade to gray. Then their peripheral vision will narrow to a tunnel. And if the force continues, they will black out entirely and lose consciousness. The crew has trained extensively to prevent this. They know how to tense their muscles and control their breathing to force blood back toward their heads. They are wearing orthostatic intolerance garments, compression suits designed to prevent blood pressure collapse when gravity returns. But training and preparation can only do so much. The human body was not designed to survive 3.9 Gs. It tolerates it, barely. But here is the thing that makes tonight different from any previous re-entry in the history of spaceflight. The danger is not just the heat shield and the plasma and the G-forces. The danger is what has already happened to their bodies over the last 10 days. Because space has been quietly dismantling them from the inside out since the moment they left the ground. Within hours of launch, the fundamental physics of their bodies changed. On Earth, gravity pulls bodily fluids downward into the legs and lower body. In microgravity, that force disappears. Fluids migrate upward, the legs thin, the face puffs. Roughly a liter of fluid volume shifts from the lower body to the upper body, and the effects are immediate and visible. Astronauts in microgravity look different. Their faces swell, their sinuses congest. Their heads feel full, like having a permanent cold that never clears. But the visible changes are the least of it. That upward fluid shift puts pressure on structures inside the skull. Intracranial pressure rises. And when intracranial pressure rises, it pushes on the back of the eyeballs. The optic nerve swells. The back of the eye can physically flatten, and vision changes. This condition has a name. It is called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, and it affects approximately 70% of astronauts who spend extended time on the International Space Station. Some astronauts return to Earth with vision changes that persist for over 630 days after landing. There is no direct treatment. It is a syndrome unique to humans who fly in space, and there is no equivalent disease on Earth. For a 10-day mission like Artemis II, the risk of severe eye changes is low. The syndrome typically develops over weeks and months, not days, but the fluid shift begins immediately. And the Artemis II crew has been providing data that will help scientists understand how quickly these changes begin, especially outside the protection of the Van Allen radiation belts, where no crewed mission has ventured since Apollo. The crew has also been living inside one of the smallest crewed spacecraft ever built for a deep space mission. The Orion cabin is 316 cubic feet. That is roughly the size of a large bathroom. 4 human beings have eaten, slept, worked, and exercised in that space for 10 days. They have access to 189 unique menu items, including coffee, smoothies, barbecue, beef brisket, and macaroni and cheese. They exercise on a flywheel resistance device roughly the size of a shoebox that can simulate up to 400 pounds of resistance. It is not much, but for a 10-day mission, it is enough to slow the worst effects of muscle wasting. Exercise physiologist Jessica Scott has described what happens to the body in microgravity in blunt terms. 10 days in space is equivalent to 10 days of strict bed rest. Muscles lose size quickly. Cardiovascular fitness declines. The heart, which no longer has to pump blood against gravity, begins to atrophy. It literally shrinks. And bones, which need the mechanical stress of weight-bearing activity to maintain their density, begin to leach calcium into the bloodstream. But the Artemis II crew did something during this mission that no humans have ever done before. They flew beyond the Van Allen belts, the magnetic shields that protect low Earth orbit from the worst of the radiation streaming through deep space. Out there, beyond those belts, they were exposed to galactic cosmic rays, high-energy particles accelerated by supernova explosions that travel at nearly the speed of light. These particles pass through spacecraft walls. They pass through spacesuits. They pass through skin and bone and tissue. And when they hit a strand of DNA, they can shatter it. To measure this, the crew carried a remarkable experiment called AVATAR. It stands for a Virtual Astronaut Tissue Analog Response. The AVATAR experiment uses organ-on-a-chip devices, tiny platforms roughly the size of a USB drive that contain living bone marrow tissue grown from the astronaut's own blood cells. These chips flew alongside the crew for the entire mission, experiencing the same microgravity and the same radiation. When the chips return to Earth, researchers at Harvard and NASA will perform single-cell RNA sequencing to measure exactly how deep space affected the tissue at the genetic level. Lisa Carnell, director of NASA Biological and Physical Sciences Division, called it potentially game-changing for NASA and for medicine on Earth. The Artemis II crew passed the point where Apollo 13 turned back. They went farther than any human in history. But here is the thing nobody is talking about. The distance record is not the achievement. The achievement is what happened to their bodies while they were out there, and what we learned about what would happen on a much longer trip. Because 10 days is survivable. 10 days is manageable. But NASA is not planning 10-day missions forever. They are planning missions to Mars. Missions that will last not 10 days, but 30 months. And everything that happened to the Artemis II crew in 10 days, the fluid shift, the bone loss, the muscle wasting, the radiation exposure, the cardiovascular changes, all of it gets worse the longer you stay, exponentially worse. And that is where our story really begins. Because space is not just uncomfortable, space is actively, aggressively, systematically trying to kill you. Every system in your body, from your skeleton to your immune system to the DNA inside your cells, is under attack from the moment you leave the ground. And the further you go, the worse it gets. The Artemis II crew went to the moon and back. What would happen if we sent them further? What would happen if we sent them to Mars, to Venus, to Jupiter? What would happen if we sent them to the bottom of the ocean? What would happen if they never came back? Those are the questions we are going to answer tonight. And we are going to start with the most fundamental assault that space makes on the human body. An assault so thorough and so relentless that if you stayed in microgravity long enough, your own skeleton would dissolve from the inside out. Chapter 2. Space is trying to kill you. In 2015, NASA conducted one of the most extraordinary experiments in the history of medicine. They sent one identical twin into space for 340 days and kept the other one on the ground. The astronaut was Scott Kelly. His brother Mark, also a former astronaut, stayed on Earth as the control subject. Same DNA, same upbringing, same career. One body in microgravity for nearly a year. The other in normal gravity. When Scott came home, they compared everything: blood, saliva, gut bacteria, cognitive performance, gene expression, chromosome structure. What they found shook the scientific community. Scott Kelly's telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of his chromosomes that normally shorten as you age, had actually grown longer during his time in space. That sounds like good news. It sounds like space might reverse aging. But it was not good news. Within days of landing, those telomeres crashed. They shortened dramatically, falling below their pre-flight length. Scott Kelly returned to Earth with more short telomeres than when he left. Short telomeres are markers of accelerated aging and increased cancer risk. His body had responded to the stress of spaceflight with a burst of repair activity, but the moment the stress ended, the system collapsed, leaving behind damage that had not been there before. But the telomeres were not the most disturbing finding. 7% of Scott Kelly's gene expression remained altered 6 months after he returned to Earth. 7%, not during spaceflight. After it, genes related to DNA repair, genes related to immune function, genes related to bone formation, genes that had been turned on or off or dialed up or down by the experience of living in space, and that refused to return to their normal settings even half a year later. The researchers could not say with certainty whether these changes were permanent, but they could say that they were unprecedented. No one had ever documented this kind of persistent genetic alteration from an environmental exposure before. Now consider what the Artemis II crew experienced. They were in space for only 10 days, not 340. The genetic effects will be smaller, but they traveled beyond the Van Allen belts, the magnetic shields generated by Earth's spinning iron core that deflect the worst of deep space radiation. Scott Kelly spent his entire mission inside those belts, in low Earth orbit, where the radiation environment is harsh but manageable. The Artemis II crew went beyond them. Out there, in the space between Earth and the Moon, they were exposed to galactic cosmic rays that the Van Allen belts normally block. These are not ordinary radiation. These are the nuclei of atoms, from hydrogen all the way up to iron and heavier, accelerated to nearly the speed of light by the shock waves of ancient supernovae. They carry enormous energy. When they strike biological tissue, they do not just damage DNA, they shatter it. They blast through the double helix like a bullet through glass, creating breaks that the body's repair mechanisms struggle to fix. And some of those breaks get fixed incorrectly, creating mutations that can lead to cancer or other diseases years or decades later. The avatar organ chips flying with the crew will tell scientists exactly how much damage this deeper radiation environment inflicts on living human tissue. But we already know from previous studies what radiation does to the body over time. Astronauts heading to Mars would be exposed to approximately 8 times the radiation that Scott Kelly received during his year on the International Space Station. A day in deep space delivers the radiation dose equivalent of an entire year on Earth. And here is the counterintuitive finding that makes it even worse. Shielding does not always help. A study published in 2025, using radiation data from the uncrewed Artemis, one mission confirmed that standard aluminum shielding can actually increase the radiation dose inside a spacecraft. When galactic cosmic rays hit aluminum, they create secondary radiation, neutrons and pions and other particles that scatter in all directions, some of them more biologically damaging than the original cosmic ray. The best shielding materials are hydrogen-rich substances like water and polyethylene, not metal. Building a spacecraft out of aluminum and then assuming it will protect the crew from radiation is not just wrong, it is dangerously wrong. But radiation is only one of the ways space attacks the body. Let us talk about bones. Your skeleton is not a static structure. It is alive. It is constantly being rebuilt. Specialized cells called osteoblasts lay down new bone, while other cells called osteoclasts break down old bone. On Earth, the mechanical stress of standing, walking, and moving under gravity tells the body to maintain strong bones. Remove that stress, and the balance shifts. Osteoclasts keep breaking bone down. Osteoblasts slow down. The result is a net loss of bone mineral density at a rate of roughly 1 to 1.5% per month. That might not sound like much, but on Earth, postmenopausal women lose bone at a rate of about 1 to 2% per year. Astronauts in microgravity lose that much in a single month. A 6-month mission on the International Space Station can inflict the equivalent of decades of osteoporosis on weight-bearing bones like the hips, spine, and legs. And the calcium does not just disappear, it floods the bloodstream. Elevated blood calcium increases the risk of kidney stones, which in microgravity are even more painful and dangerous because there is no gravity to help them pass. After returning to Earth, some bone loss recovers. But studies have shown that not all of it does. Astronauts who spent 6 months on the International Space Station still had measurably lower bone density in certain areas a year after landing. Some of the bone that was lost may never come back. The Artemis II crew exercised every day aboard Orion using their flywheel resistance device. For a 10-day mission, this is sufficient to slow the worst effects. But the flywheel on Orion cannot match the exercise equipment on the International Space Station, which includes a full-size treadmill and an advanced resistance exercise device. For longer missions, the exercise equipment matters enormously. On a 3-year round trip to Mars, losing 1.5% of bone density per month during the transit phases could leave astronauts with skeletons too fragile to function in Martian gravity. They would arrive on Mars and potentially break their hips, stepping off the ladder. And then there is the brain. In microgravity, the brain physically shifts upward inside the skull. Magnetic resonance imaging of astronauts after long-duration missions shows that the ventricles, the fluid-filled spaces inside the brain, enlarge measurably. White matter pathways, the neural highways that connect different brain regions, compress and deform. Cerebrospinal fluid pools in places it normally does not. The entire organ repositions itself inside the cranium, adapting to an environment it was never designed for. The cognitive effects are real and measurable. After his year in space, Scott Kelly showed declines in reaction time and spatial reasoning. His cognitive performance was notably reduced for months after landing. Some studies have suggested that the combination of fluid shift, radiation exposure, and elevated carbon dioxide levels inside spacecraft creates a triple threat to brain function. And that carbon dioxide point matters more than most people realize. The International Space Station operates at carbon dioxide levels approximately 10 times higher than Earth's atmosphere. Not because the life support system is failing, but because scrubbing all the carbon dioxide out of a sealed environment is extraordinarily difficult and energy-intensive. Even at these mildly elevated levels, astronauts report persistent headaches, impaired concentration, and a general fogginess that never fully lifts. Now add the fluid shift that is already causing intracranial pressure to rise. Now add the radiation that is killing neurons and triggering neuroinflammation. The brain is being attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, and it has no way to escape any of them. Space motion sickness compounds the misery. Between 60 and 80% of astronauts experience it within the first 2 to 3 days of spaceflight. It is not like seasickness. Anti-nausea medications that work on Earth are largely ineffective in microgravity. The problem is fundamental. Your brain receives spatial orientation information from 3 sources: your eyes, your inner ear, and proprioceptors in your muscles and joints. On Earth, all 3 agree. You can feel which way is down. In microgravity, there is no down. Your inner ear sends one signal, your eyes send another. Your proprioceptors send a third. None of them agree. The brain cannot reconcile the conflicting inputs, and the result is nausea, vomiting, disorientation, and an inability to perform basic tasks. Most astronauts adapt within 3 to 4 days. Some take longer. A few never fully adapt. Everything you just heard, the genetic damage, the bone dissolution, the brain displacement, the nausea, the cognitive decline, all of that happens in microgravity. 0G. But the Artemis II crew did not stay in 0G the whole time. They swung around the moon, where gravity is 0.17 G. And right now, tonight, they are about to re-enter Earth's atmosphere at 3.9 G. Every gravity change breaks the body differently. And we have not even talked about what happens when gravity goes up instead of down. What happens when a human body is subjected to forces so extreme that the blood in your veins weighs more than your heart can push? That is where we are going next, because the story of what happens to the human body is not just about zero gravity. It is about every gravity, and some of them are far more terrifying than weightlessness. Chapter 3. The G-force spectrum. Let us talk about what 3.9 Gs actually feels like. Not the number, the experience. You are Reid Wiseman. You are strapped into the commander's seat inside the Orion capsule. The cabin around you is small, familiar after 10 days. The windows are dark. You have been falling toward Earth for days, accelerating as the planet's gravity pulls you closer. And now you have hit the atmosphere. The first thing you notice is pressure, not from outside, from inside your own body. At 3.9 Gs, you weigh nearly 4 times what you normally weigh. If you weigh 180 pounds on a bathroom scale, you now effectively weigh 700 pounds. Your arms feel like they are filled with wet concrete. Lifting your hand to flip a switch requires deliberate muscular effort. Your chest feels heavy. Breathing becomes labored because the muscles that expand your ribcage now have to lift nearly 4 times the normal weight of your chest wall. But the real danger is not in your muscles. It is in your blood. Blood is a liquid. It responds to gravity just like any other liquid. At 3.9 Gs, your blood is being pulled downward, away from your brain, toward your legs and abdomen. Your heart, which normally pumps blood upward against 1 G of gravity, now has to pump against nearly 4. And it was not designed for this. The first sign is the loss of color. The world fades. Everything turns gray. This is called grey-out, and it happens because the blood supply to your retinas is dropping. Your eyes are starving for oxygen. Next, your peripheral vision collapses. The edges of your visual field darken and close in, leaving only a narrow tunnel of sight directly in front of you. This is tunnel vision, and it means the blood supply to your brain is critically compromised. If the G-force continues or increases, the tunnel closes entirely. You go blind, and then seconds later, you lose consciousness. This is called G-induced loss of consciousness, or G-lock, and it is one of the most dangerous events that can happen to a pilot or an astronaut. Fighter pilots train to withstand sustained G-forces in centrifuges. The standard combat qualification for most air forces is 7.5 Gs, sustained for 15 seconds. About 5% of trainees cannot do it, no matter how hard they try. Their cardiovascular systems simply cannot maintain blood pressure to the brain at that level. At 9 Gs, even experienced pilots can be knocked unconscious. The most powerful human centrifuge in the world is in Königsbrück, Germany, and it can generate forces that would kill an unprotected human being. The Artemis II crew trained for their re-entry profile extensively. They know the anti-G straining maneuver. You tense every muscle in your lower body, your legs, your abdomen, your glutes, as hard as you can. This compresses the blood vessels and prevents blood from pooling in your extremities. You breathe in short, controlled bursts, grunting against a closed airway to keep your chest pressure high. And you are wearing the orthostatic intolerance garments that compress your legs mechanically, acting like an external heart that squeezes blood back upward. At 3.9 Gs, all of this is manageable. Uncomfortable, intense, but manageable. The re-entry lasts about 13 minutes, and the peak G-force is not sustained the entire time. It comes in pulses as the capsule performs a lofted entry, skipping off the upper atmosphere like a stone off water to bleed off speed gradually rather than all at once. But 3.9 Gs is just one number on a very long spectrum, and the spectrum extends in both directions, downward toward the feathery gravity of the moon at 0.17 G, and upward toward forces that no human being can survive. Now let us leave Earth's atmosphere entirely. Let us take the Artemis II crew somewhere else, somewhere with much more gravity. Let us take them to Jupiter. Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system. It is 318 times the mass of Earth. You could fit over 1,300 Earths inside it and still have room to spare, and its gravity is punishing. At the cloud tops, where you would first encounter anything resembling a surface, the gravitational pull is 2.53 times that of Earth. A 180-pound person would weigh 455 pounds. You would not be able to stand up. Your cardiovascular system, designed to pump blood against 1G, would struggle catastrophically against 2.5. Blood would pool in your lower body. Your heart would enlarge and strain to push fluid upward. Over time, perhaps days or weeks, cardiac failure would follow. Your heart would simply give out. But you would never get the chance to experience cardiac failure on Jupiter, because Jupiter has no surface. There is nothing to stand on. Jupiter is a gas giant. Its visible bands and storms, including the Great Red Spot, are cloud formations in an atmosphere made primarily of hydrogen and helium. If you fell into Jupiter, you would descend through thickening gas. The pressure would increase steadily. The temperature would rise. Hundreds of miles down, the hydrogen gas would become so compressed that it would transition into a liquid. You would not splash into this liquid the way you splash into water. There is no sharp boundary. The gas simply thickens and thickens until it is no longer gas. You would be embedded in liquid hydrogen, still sinking, still being crushed, still getting hotter. Deeper still, the pressure becomes so extreme that the liquid hydrogen transitions into metallic hydrogen, a state of matter that does not exist naturally anywhere on Earth's surface. At this point, the temperature exceeds 5,000 degrees, and the pressure is millions of times Earth's atmospheric pressure. You would have been dead for a very long time. And we have not even mentioned the radiation. Jupiter's magnetosphere is the largest structure in the solar system. It generates radiation belts that make Earth's Van Allen belts look gentle. The radiation around Jupiter is so intense that it would deliver a lethal dose to an unshielded human within hours. Even inside a heavily shielded spacecraft, the radiation environment around Jupiter is extremely dangerous. The Juno spacecraft, which orbits Jupiter, was designed with a titanium radiation vault to protect its electronics. And even then, some instruments have degraded over time from the bombardment. So Jupiter kills you with gravity, then pressure, then heat, then radiation. It is perhaps the most hostile environment in our solar system for a human body. But now let us consider something strange. Let us go to Saturn. Saturn is 95 times the mass of Earth. It is the second largest planet in the solar system. You would expect its surface gravity to be immense, but it is not. Saturn's surface gravity at the cloud tops is only 1.07 g, almost identical to Earth. If you could somehow stand on Saturn's clouds, you would feel almost normal. Your weight would be almost exactly what it is right now. Your heart would pump blood just fine. Your bones would experience normal loading. For about 3 seconds, you might even feel comfortable. The reason is density. Saturn is enormous, but it is made of incredibly light material, primarily hydrogen and helium. Its average density is lower than water. If you could find a bathtub big enough, Saturn would float. The planet's mass is spread over such a vast volume that the surface gravity, which depends on both mass and radius, ends up being almost the same as Earth's. But comfort on Saturn lasts about 3 seconds because the winds would kill you immediately. Saturn's equatorial winds reach speeds of 1,100 miles per hour. That is faster than the speed of sound on Earth. You would be ripped sideways, tumbled, and shredded by wind forces no human structure or suit could withstand. And even if you survived the winds, you would face the same fate as on Jupiter. Saturn has no surface. You would sink through hydrogen gas into liquid hydrogen, into metallic hydrogen, pressured and heated into oblivion. What about Saturn's moon, Titan? Titan has an atmosphere thicker than Earth's, made primarily of nitrogen. Its surface gravity is only 0.14 g, even less than the Moon. You would feel incredibly light. A 180-pound person would weigh about 25 pounds. You could strap on wings and fly under your own muscle power in that thick atmosphere and low gravity. It sounds almost dreamlike, but the surface temperature on Titan is negative 179 degrees Celsius. The lakes on its surface are not water. They are liquid methane and ethane. Your blood would freeze in your veins in minutes. Jupiter crushes you with gravity. Saturn tricks you with low gravity, then kills you with wind. Titan freezes you solid. But there is a planet in our solar system where the gravity is almost identical to Earth's, where the surface is solid rock, where you would feel your own weight almost exactly as you feel it now. And it would still kill you faster than either gas giant. That planet is Venus. And Venus does not just kill you, it annihilates you. Chapter 4. The Venus Problem. Venus is often called Earth's twin. It is almost the same size, almost the same mass. Its gravity is 0.91 g, so close to Earth's that you would barely notice the difference. If you weighed 180 pounds on Earth, you would weigh 164 pounds on Venus. You would feel lighter on your feet, but your body would function almost normally from a gravitational standpoint. Your heart would pump blood efficiently. Your bones would bear weight. Your vestibular system would orient you correctly. From a gravity perspective alone, Venus is the most Earth-like destination in the solar system, and it would kill you in under 10 seconds. The surface of Venus is a nightmare that defies human comprehension. The temperature at the surface is 467 degrees Celsius. That is 872 degrees Fahrenheit. It is hot enough to melt lead, tin, and zinc. It is hotter than the surface of Mercury, even though Mercury is almost twice as close to the Sun. The reason is the atmosphere. Venus has the most extreme greenhouse effect in the solar system. Its atmosphere is 96% carbon dioxide, and it is thick, unimaginably thick. The atmospheric pressure at the surface is 92 times Earth's sea level pressure. That is equivalent to being 900 meters underwater on Earth, nearly 3,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, and the atmosphere is laced with sulfuric acid. Let us walk through what would happen to an unprotected human body on the surface of Venus. The moment you appeared, the pressure would collapse your lungs instantly. Your lungs contain air at roughly 1 atmosphere of pressure. The surrounding atmosphere is at 92 atmospheres. Every air-filled space in your body, your lungs, your sinuses, your inner ears, your intestines, would implode. The pressure differential would crush these structures inward with catastrophic force. Your ribcage would buckle, your eardrums would rupture instantly, your intestines would collapse, and your abdominal cavity would deform. Simultaneously, the heat would begin destroying your tissue. At 467 degrees, your skin would not burn the way it does in a kitchen fire. It would undergo immediate coagulation necrosis. The proteins in your cells would denature and solidify. Your outer layers would cook faster than you could feel pain, because the nerve endings in your skin would be destroyed in the first fraction of a second. Third-degree burns would cover your entire body instantly, but the word burn is inadequate. You would be baked, seared. Your body fluids would begin to boil off as the heat penetrated deeper, and then the sulfuric acid. The clouds of Venus contain concentrated sulfuric acid droplets. At the surface, the acid content is lower, but trace amounts in the atmosphere would react with your tissue, accelerating the chemical destruction of your skin and any exposed organic material. The Soviet Union is the only nation to have successfully landed spacecraft on the surface of Venus. The Venera program sent a series of probes to Venus between 1961 and 1984. The most successful was Venera 13, which landed on March 1st, 1982. The lander was built like a tank. It was heavily reinforced with titanium and steel, designed to withstand the crushing pressure and extreme heat. It survived for 127 minutes on the surface before Venus destroyed it. 127 minutes for a machine built out of the toughest materials human engineering could provide. An unprotected human body would last perhaps 5 to 10 seconds, maybe less. Now let us take the Artemis II crew and send them not to the surface, but to the skies of Venus. Because here is the strangest fact about Venus, a fact that completely reframes the conversation. 50 kilometers above the surface, the conditions change dramatically. At that altitude, the temperature drops to between 20 and 60 degrees Celsius, room temperature. The atmospheric pressure drops to approximately 1 bar, Earth's sea level pressure. The gravity is still 0.9 g. And because the atmosphere of Venus is so dense, made almost entirely of carbon dioxide, breathable air, a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, is actually a lifting gas. It is lighter than the surrounding carbon dioxide atmosphere. This means that a balloon or an airship filled with ordinary breathable air would float naturally at 50 kilometers altitude on Venus. The habitat itself provides the buoyancy. You would live inside a floating vessel suspended in the clouds of Venus in conditions more Earth-like than anywhere else in the solar system outside of Earth itself. NASA has studied this concept seriously. The high-altitude Venus operational concept proposed crewed airships that would circle Venus in the cloud layer, conducting science and potentially serving as the first long-term human habitation of another planet. The catch is the sulfuric acid. The cloud layer on Venus extends from roughly 48 to 65 kilometers altitude, directly through the sweet spot where temperature and pressure are hospitable. Concentrated sulfuric acid droplets permeate this zone. Any material exposed to the clouds would corrode rapidly. Equipment seals, solar panels, structural surfaces, everything would degrade unless protected by acid-resistant coatings. Human skin exposed to sulfuric acid at the concentrations found in Venus's clouds would suffer immediate chemical burns. A breach in the habitat envelope would not just depressurize the living space, it would expose the crew to corrosive acid vapor. But the concept is real, it is physically sound. And among all the extreme destinations we are exploring tonight, the upper atmosphere of Venus is paradoxically the most habitable off-Earth environment in the solar system. Now, let us bring this back to the body. Because the Venus problem is really a pressure problem, and pressure is the universal killer. It connects Venus to the deep ocean. It connects both of them to the Orion spacecraft. The human body is remarkably adaptable to moderate pressure changes. Scuba divers routinely descend to depths of 30 to 40 meters, experiencing 3 to 4 atmospheres of pressure. With proper training and equipment, deep divers reach far greater depths. But there are hard limits. At 92 atmospheres, the Venus surface pressure, no human technology exists that could protect a person for more than a few hours. The pressure does not just compress airspaces. It forces gases into the bloodstream at dangerous concentrations. Nitrogen dissolves into the blood and tissue under pressure, causing narcosis, a condition that feels like extreme intoxication. Oxygen under high pressure becomes toxic, triggering seizures and lung damage. Helium, used in deep diving mixtures to avoid nitrogen narcosis, causes tremors and convulsions at extreme pressures through a condition called high-pressure nervous syndrome. The Orion spacecraft faces the opposite problem. The cabin is pressurized to approximately 1 atmosphere, surrounded by the vacuum of space. A breach in the hull would expose the crew not to 92 atmospheres of crushing carbon dioxide, but to 0 atmospheres. Nothing. The air would rush out of the cabin in seconds. The moisture on the crew's eyes, tongues, and in their lungs would begin to boil. Not because it is hot, but because in a vacuum, the boiling point of water drops below body temperature. You would not freeze immediately, because space is a vacuum, and heat transfers very slowly without air to carry it away. You would remain conscious for about 10 to 15 seconds as the oxygen in your blood was consumed. Then you would lose consciousness. Death would follow within 1 to 2 minutes. Venus kills with too much pressure. Space kills with too little. The human body evolved for exactly one pressure, and it tolerates almost no deviation in either direction. We are creatures of a razor-thin margin, balanced between crushing force and empty void. But you do not have to travel to Venus or to space to experience what extreme pressure does to the human body. You can experience it right here on Earth. All you have to do is go down, straight down, into the deepest, darkest, most alien environment on our own planet. A place where the pressure is not 92 atmospheres but 1100. A place where the force on every square inch of your body is equivalent to 50 jumbo jets stacked on top of each other. A place that has killed more explorers in the last decade than any destination in space, the deep ocean. And that is where we are going next. Chapter 5. The Crush Zone. Pressure is invisible. You cannot see it. You cannot hear it. You can barely feel it under normal conditions, because the human body is mostly water, and water is nearly incompressible. But pressure is always there. Right now, wherever you are, approximately 14.7 pounds of force are pressing on every square inch of your body. That is 1 atmosphere. The weight of the entire column of air from the ground to the edge of space, pressing down on you from every direction. You do not feel it because the pressure inside your body, in your lungs, in your sinuses, in every cell, matches the pressure outside. The forces are balanced. You are in equilibrium. Now go underwater. At just 10 meters below the surface, the pressure doubles. 2 atmospheres. You feel it immediately in your ears, a sharp squeezing sensation as the airspace in your middle ear compresses, equalized by swallowing or pinching your nose and blowing, and the pain resolves. Your body adjusts. But the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to adjust, because the body has air spaces that cannot be equalized. At 30 meters, recreational scuba divers begin to feel the first effects of nitrogen narcosis, sometimes called the rapture of the deep. Dissolved nitrogen in the blood begins to interfere with neural signaling. Judgment becomes impaired. Reaction times slow. The sensation is remarkably similar to intoxication. Divers at 30 meters have been known to offer their regulators to fish, convinced that the fish need air. They have removed their masks because they felt too warm. They have swum deeper when they should have been ascending. Nitrogen narcosis is not painful. It is seductive. And that makes it deadly. At 100 meters, the human body is experiencing 11 atmospheres of pressure. Recreational diving certifications do not go this deep. This is the realm of technical divers and competitive free divers. The lungs, which at the surface contain about 6 liters of air, have compressed to roughly half a liter. The diaphragm is pushed upward by the squeezed lung volume, and here something remarkable happens. A hidden survival mechanism activates, one that we share with dolphins and seals. It is called the mammalian dive reflex. When your face contacts cold water, your heart rate drops by 10 to 50%. Blood vessels in your extremities constrict, redirecting blood to the core organs, the heart, the brain, the lungs. And at depth, the capillaries surrounding the lungs flood with plasma in a process called blood shift. This plasma infiltration reinforces the lung tissue against further compression, preventing the alveoli from collapsing entirely. Free divers have exploited this reflex to reach astonishing depths. The current no-limits record exceeds 250 meters. At that depth, the heart can beat as slowly as 30 beats per minute. The lungs are compressed to a fraction of their normal volume. Buoyancy inverts, meaning the diver sinks without effort, pulled downward by the compressed air in their lungs which can no longer hold them up. One wrong equalization, one miscalculated timing on the ascent, and the alveoli tear. This is called lung squeeze. The diver surfaces coughing blood lungs perforated by the pressure differential. Some do not surface at all. Now let us go deeper, much deeper. At 380 meters, you reach the depth of the Titanic wreck. The pressure here is 380 atmospheres. No human has ever swum this deep. No human body could survive this depth without a pressure vessel. The forces would collapse every airspace in your body simultaneously. Your lungs would implode. Your sinuses would crush inward. Your eardrums would rupture. The gases dissolved in your blood under this pressure would be at concentrations incompatible with neural function. You would be unconscious before you were dead, which is perhaps the only mercy. At the bottom of the ocean, in the Challenger Deep of the Mariana Trench, the depth reaches 10,935 meters, nearly 11 kilometers straight down. The pressure at the bottom is approximately 1,100 atmospheres. Every square inch of surface area, whether that surface is metal, glass, or human tissue, is bearing the weight of roughly 16,000 pounds. That is the equivalent of about 50 jumbo jets pressing on every square inch of your body. In 2023, the world was reminded of what these pressures can do when the Titan submersible imploded during a descent to the Titanic wreck. The submersible carried 5 people. When the hull failed, the implosion occurred in milliseconds. The occupants did not drown. They did not suffocate. They were destroyed. At 380 atmospheres, the human body does not simply compress, it obliterates. The pressure differential between the inside of the hull and the surrounding water was so extreme that the vessel and everything inside it collapsed inward faster than the speed of sound in water. The occupants likely did not have time to register what was happening. The event was faster than the speed of neural transmission. They were alive, and then they were not, in less time than it takes a nerve signal to travel from your hand to your brain. Now, let us run a thought experiment. What if we took the Artemis II crew, Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen, and instead of sending them to the moon, we sent them to the bottom of the ocean? What if we put them in a pressurized habitat at a depth of 1,000 meters for an extended stay? The physiological stresses would mirror space in disturbing ways. Isolation, confinement, altered pressure environments, psychological strain from being cut off from the surface world. The knowledge that rescue, if something goes wrong, is not guaranteed. But the specific threats would be different. In space, the danger is the absence of pressure and gravity. In the deep ocean, the danger is the excess of both. Deep saturation divers, people who live at pressure for weeks at a time in specialized habitats, experience a condition called high-pressure nervous syndrome. At pressures equivalent to depths below about 150 meters, the nervous system begins to malfunction. Tremors develop in the hands and fingers. Dizziness and nausea set in. In severe cases, convulsions follow. The mechanism is not entirely understood but appears to involve the direct effect of pressure on neural membranes, compressing them in ways that alter the speed and reliability of nerve impulse transmission. Saturation divers who work at extreme depths breathe specialized gas mixtures. Helium replaces nitrogen to avoid narcosis. Hydrogen is sometimes added for the deepest dives. The voice changes because helium is less dense than nitrogen, causing the vocal cords to vibrate at higher frequencies. Divers at depth sound like cartoon characters, a strange and somewhat unsettling detail that undercuts the seriousness of what they are doing. But what they are doing is extraordinarily serious. They are spending weeks with every cell in their body under pressures that would kill an unprepared human instantly. And when they come back to the surface, they must decompress slowly, sometimes spending days or weeks in a decompression chamber, allowing dissolved gases to leave their tissues gradually. Decompress too fast, and the gases form bubbles in the blood and tissues. This is decompression sickness, commonly known as the bends. Bubbles in the joints cause excruciating pain. Bubbles in the spinal cord cause paralysis. Bubbles in the brain cause stroke. Bubbles in the lungs cause respiratory failure. In severe cases, decompression sickness is fatal. Space and the deep ocean are mirror image killers. Space steals gravity and pressure. The ocean drowns you in both. One breaks you by removing the forces your body depends on. The other breaks you by amplifying those forces beyond what your body can withstand. And the Artemis II crew, in their tiny Orion capsule, is balanced between these two extremes. Their cabin pressure is maintained at 1 atmosphere. Outside their hull is the vacuum of space. A few millimeters of hull material is all that separates normal human physiology from instant death in either direction. But there is a place in our solar system where the body faces something even stranger than zero gravity, or 1100 atmospheres, a gravity environment the human body has never experienced in its entire evolutionary history. Not zero, not Earth normal, something in between. Just enough gravity to confuse every system in your body, but not enough to save any of them. That place is Mars. And the problem with Mars is not that it will kill you quickly. The problem is that it will kill you slowly, quietly, from the inside, in ways you will not notice until it is too late. Chapter 6. The Mars Trap. Mars looks like the answer. When you see photographs of the Martian surface, rusty red soil stretching to a butterscotch sky, it looks hostile but conquerable. It looks like a desert. We know deserts. We have lived in deserts for thousands of years. Mars has mountains and valleys and polar ice caps and seasons. It has a 24-hour and 37-minute day, almost identical to Earth's. It has water ice at its poles and possibly beneath its surface. Of all the destinations in the solar system, Mars is the one that looks most like somewhere we could actually live. And that is the trap. Because Mars does not kill you the way Venus does, instantly and obviously. Mars kills you slowly, insidiously, in ways that are almost impossible to see until the damage is done. Let us start with gravity. Mars has a surface gravity of 0.38 g. A 180-pound person would weigh 68 pounds. Walking would feel light and bouncy, similar to a slow-motion film of someone on a trampoline. You would be able to jump higher, carry heavier loads relative to your weight, and move with an ease that would feel almost playful. For the first few days, it would be delightful. But here is the problem that no one has solved, the problem that keeps NASA physiologists awake at night. We do not know if 0.38 g is enough. Enough to prevent the bone loss that happens in 0 g. Enough to stop the muscle atrophy. Enough to maintain cardiovascular conditioning. Enough to prevent the fluid shift that causes spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. Enough to keep the brain positioned correctly inside the skull. We have no idea. Every study ever conducted on the human body in altered gravity has been done in one of two conditions, either 0 g on the International Space Station or 1 g on Earth. There are no studies at 0.38 g. None. We have no partial gravity data for humans at all. The Moon, at 0.17 g, has been visited briefly by 12 people who spent at most 3 days on the surface. No long-term physiological data was collected. Mars has never been visited by humans. We are planning to send people to live on a planet at a gravity level that has never been tested on a single human being for more than a few minutes in a centrifuge. It is entirely possible that 0.38 g is sufficient to prevent the worst effects of microgravity. The mechanical loading of walking, even at reduced weight, might be enough to stimulate bone maintenance and muscle preservation. The partial gravity might be enough to keep fluids distributed properly and prevent the intracranial pressure buildup that causes eye damage. It might be fine, but it is also entirely possible that it is not. That 0.38 g triggers the same cascade of physiological breakdown as 0 g, just slower. That bones still dissolve, just at a rate of 0.5% per month instead of 1.5%. That muscles still waste, just gradually enough that the astronaut does not notice until they try to run and their legs fail. that the heart still shrinks, still atrophies, still loses the capacity to handle the full 1G of Earth gravity if the astronaut ever tries to come home. And consider the timeline. A mission to Mars using current propulsion technology takes 6 to 9 months in transit each way. During those transit phases, the crew is in 0G. Their bodies are experiencing full microgravity deterioration for over a year in total. Then they arrive on Mars and experience 0.3, 8G for 12 to 14 months. Then they transit back to Earth for another 6 to 9 months of 0G. Total mission duration, roughly 30 months. 2.5 years of altered gravity with no period of recovery at 1G. If 0.38G does not stop bone loss, the math becomes terrifying. Losing even 0.5% per month over 30 months means losing 15% of bone mineral density in weight-bearing bones. That is severe osteoporosis by any clinical definition. Returning to Earth at 1G with bones that fragile could mean fractures from ordinary activities, stepping off a curb, lifting a child, tripping on a rug. The astronauts who walked on the Moon might never be able to walk comfortably on Earth again. Now let us talk about radiation on Mars, because it is worse than in deep space, and it is worse for a reason you might not expect. Mars has no global magnetic field. Earth has one. It is generated by the churning liquid iron in Earth's outer core, and it extends tens of thousands of miles into space, deflecting charged particles from the Sun and from deep space. Without this invisible shield, the surface of a planet is exposed to the full force of the radiation environment. Mars lost its magnetic field billions of years ago. Its core cooled and solidified, and the dynamo that generated the field stopped spinning. Whatever protection Mars once had is gone. Mars also has almost no atmosphere. The atmospheric pressure on Mars is less than 1% of Earth's. The thin blanket of carbon dioxide that covers the planet provides minimal shielding against incoming radiation. On Earth, you have the magnetic field and a thick atmosphere working together to reduce your radiation exposure to negligible levels. On Mars, you have neither. The result is stark. A single day on the surface of Mars delivers the radiation dose equivalent of an entire year on Earth. Over the course of a 30-month mission, the crew would accumulate a dose that approaches or exceeds NASA's career radiation limit for astronauts. The estimated risk is a 5% increase in radiation-induced mortality, with upper confidence intervals reaching as high as 10%. That means the crew of a Mars mission would accept roughly a 1 in 10 to 1 in 20 chance of developing a fatal cancer, specifically because of the radiation they received on the mission. And shielding on Mars presents the same counterintuitive problem as shielding in deep space. Standard building materials like aluminum and steel can actually make the radiation worse by generating secondary particles when cosmic rays strike them. The best shielding would be regolith, the Martian soil itself, piled meters thick over habitats, or water circulated through walls in thick layers. Both solutions are engineering challenges that add mass, complexity, and cost to an already staggering mission. But there is one more problem with Mars that has nothing to do with gravity or radiation. It has to do with the ground itself. Martian soil is not like Earth soil. It contains perchlorates, chlorine-based chemical compounds that are toxic to the human thyroid gland. Perchlorates disrupt thyroid hormone production, which regulates metabolism, growth, and development. Chronic exposure could cause hypothyroidism, weight gain, fatigue, cognitive slowing, and in severe cases, developmental damage. Every surface on Mars is coated with perchlorate-laced dust. Every airlock cycle risks bringing this dust inside the habitat. Every spacesuit that returns from the surface carries it. Filtering it entirely from the interior environment would be extraordinarily difficult. And the dust itself is dangerous, even without the perchlorates. Martian regolith contains ultra-fine iron oxide particles that are smaller and sharper than anything found in Earth's soils. These particles could penetrate deep into lung tissue if inhaled, causing inflammation, scarring, and potentially cancer. The closest Earth analog is the kind of fine mineral dust that causes silicosis in miners. But Martian dust may be worse because it is chemically reactive and has never been weathered by water the way Earth's minerals have. Mars looks survivable from orbit, but the gravity might not save your bones. The radiation will rewrite your DNA, and the dust will poison your lungs. It is a slow-motion death sentence dressed up as a frontier adventure. And still, it is the best option we have for a second home. The question is not whether Mars will hurt us. It is whether we can find ways to survive it long enough to matter. But before we solve the problems of Mars, we need to understand one more thing that space does to the human body. Something that has only been discovered in the last 2 decades. Something so strange and so personal that it changes the way astronauts think about their own bodies. Something happening right now, tonight, to the eyes of the Artemis II crew as they fall toward Earth. Their eyeballs are changing shape, and for some astronauts, they never change back. Chapter 7. Your eyes change shape. This is perhaps the most unsettling thing that happens to the human body in space. Not because it is the most dangerous, not because it is the most painful, but because it is the most personal. Your eyes are how you see the world. They are how you recognize faces, read instruments, judge distances, navigate your environment. And, in space, they physically deform. The condition is called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, abbreviated as SANS. It was formally described in 2011 when researchers published the results of thorough eye examinations on 7 astronauts before and after 6-month missions on the International Space Station. What they found was alarming. 5 of the 7 had optic disc edema, swelling where the optic nerve enters the back of the eye. 5 had globe flattening, a measurable change in the shape of the eyeball itself, with the back of the eye pushing inward as if an invisible thumb were pressing on it from behind. 5 had choroidal folds, wrinkles in the retina caused by the distortion. 3 had cotton wool spots, small areas of ischemic retina where blood supply had been compromised. 6 had thickening of the nerve fiber layer, and 6 reported changes in their vision, particularly a decline in near visual acuity. Since then, the numbers have only become clearer and more concerning. Approximately 70% of astronauts who fly long-duration missions on the International Space Station experience some degree of SANS. Some experience only mild changes. Others have clinically significant outcomes that persist long after they return to Earth. A 2025 study of 29 astronauts confirmed an average hyperopic shift, meaning a measurable move toward farsightedness, in astronauts after spaceflight. Some astronauts have reported vision changes that lasted more than 630 days after landing, over a year and a half back on Earth, and their eyes had still not returned to their pre-flight state. The mechanism is believed to be related to the upward fluid shift that occurs in microgravity. On Earth, gravity pulls blood and cerebrospinal fluid downward. In space, these fluids redistribute toward the head. Intracranial pressure rises. The increased pressure in the cerebrospinal fluid surrounding the optic nerve pushes against the back of the eyeball, literally reshaping it. The optic disc, the point where the nerve connects to the retina, swells under the pressure. The choroid, the vascular layer behind the retina, thickens as congested blood pools in the head. The cumulative effect is a structural deformation of the eye that alters its optical properties. SANS is unique among spaceflight health risks in a disturbing way. There is no terrestrial disease equivalent. No condition on Earth produces exactly this combination of findings. Idiopathic intracranial hypertension shares some features but differs in key details. SANS appears to be a syndrome that exists only in humans who fly in space. It is, in a very literal sense, a disease that did not exist until we left the planet, and there is no direct treatment. Astronauts cannot take a pill to prevent it. They cannot exercise it away. Some countermeasures are being explored. including lower body negative pressure devices that pull fluid back toward the legs, venoconstrictive thigh cuffs, and specialized impedance threshold devices that alter intrathoracic pressure to reduce the fluid shift. But none of these have been proven to prevent SANS entirely. It remains classified as a red risk by NASA, meaning it is a potential mission stopper, a condition serious enough that it could force NASA to cancel or redesign a deep space mission if no countermeasure is found. Now, what about the Artemis II crew? Their mission is only 10 days. Historical data suggests that significant SANS changes typically develop over weeks and months, not days. Short-duration astronauts, those who fly missions of less than 2 weeks, have a lower incidence of reported visual changes, roughly 23%, compared to 48% for long-duration crews. So the Artemis II crew is likely below the threshold for serious eye damage. But their mission is not just about 10 days. It is about establishing the first baseline data for crews traveling beyond Earth's magnetic field. Every previous SANS study has been conducted on astronauts in low Earth orbit inside the Van Allen belts, where the radiation environment is different from deep space. The Artemis II crew is the first group of humans in over 50 years to fly beyond those belts. If radiation compounds the fluid shift problem, if galactic cosmic rays damage the delicate structures of the eye in ways that amplify the effects of intracranial pressure, then the SANS risk for a Mars mission could be far worse than current projections suggest. The Avatar organ-on-a-chip experiment flying with the crew is designed to help answer exactly this question. By examining how deep space radiation and microgravity together affect living tissue at the cellular level, researchers hope to understand whether the combination of stressors is additive or synergistic. Additive means the effects simply stack on top of each other. Synergistic means they multiply each other, creating damage far greater than either stressor alone. If the answer is synergistic, the implications for long-duration deep space missions are severe. There is another eye-related risk that connects to a broader and equally frightening discovery about the human body in space. It involves the blood. Specifically, it involves what happens to the blood flowing through the veins in your neck when gravity disappears. On Earth, blood flows from your heart through arteries to your brain, then returns through veins in your neck, assisted by gravity pulling it downward back toward the heart. In microgravity, there is no assist. The blood returning from the brain has to find its way back to the heart without gravity helping it along. And researchers discovered something startling. In some astronauts, blood flow in the internal jugular vein, one of the major veins draining the brain, slows dramatically. In some cases, the flow stagnates entirely. In at least one documented case, the flow actually reversed direction. Blood that should have been draining from the brain was flowing backward. Stagnant or reversed blood flow creates the conditions for blood clots to form. A clot in the jugular vein is dangerous on its own, but the real terror is what happens if that clot breaks loose. It can travel through the venous system to the lungs, causing a pulmonary embolism. On Earth, a pulmonary embolism is a medical emergency that requires immediate treatment, often with blood thinners or surgical intervention. In space, hundreds of thousands of miles from the nearest hospital, a pulmonary embolism could be fatal. During the Artemis II mission, the crew aboard the International Space Station performed coordinated science activities alongside the deep space crew. One of those activities involved using ultrasound to scan their own veins, with doctors on the ground monitoring in real time, looking for exactly this kind of blood flow abnormality. The goal is to build a database of vascular observations that will inform how we protect crews on longer missions. Your eyes change shape, your blood flows backward, clots form in your neck veins. And all of this happens in the relative safety of microgravity, inside a pressurized cabin, with Earth just a few hours away by rescue craft. The Artemis II crew went beyond the Van Allen belts, out to a distance where rescue is not possible, where communication takes seconds of light-speed delay. and where the radiation environment is fundamentally different from anything in low Earth orbit. Out there, beyond those belts, there is a different kind of danger, one that hits every cell in your body simultaneously, particles that cannot be shielded, energy that passes through the walls of your spacecraft as if they are not there, radiation that has traveled for millions of years across the galaxy, remnants of stars that exploded before our sun was born, aimed at nothing in particular but hitting everything in their path, including, for 10 days in April 2026, 4 human bodies in a capsule called Integrity, falling home through the dark. Chapter 8: The Invisible Bullets. Somewhere in a galaxy far from ours, a star died. Not recently, millions of years ago, maybe hundreds of millions. It ran out of fuel, its core collapsed. And in the final fraction of a second of its existence, it exploded with a force that briefly outshone every other star in its galaxy combined, a supernova. And in that explosion, atoms were ripped apart, and their nuclei were hurled outward at velocities approaching the speed of light. Hydrogen nuclei, helium nuclei, carbon, oxygen, iron. Some heavier than iron, stripped of their electrons, carrying enormous kinetic energy. These particles flew into the void. They crossed the space between galaxies. They entered the Milky Way. They passed through dust clouds and star systems and the empty spaces between. And tonight, some of them are passing through a small spacecraft called Orion, and through the bodies of 4 human beings inside it. These are galactic cosmic rays. They are the most energetic particles in the known universe. Unlike radiation from the Sun, which consists primarily of protons and electrons at relatively modest energies that can be deflected by magnetic fields and blocked by moderate shielding, galactic cosmic rays are different. They are heavier, they are faster, and they are nearly unstoppable. A single galactic cosmic ray particle can carry the kinetic energy of a fast-pitched baseball concentrated into an object smaller than an atom. When one of these particles strikes the hull of a spacecraft, it does not simply bounce off or get absorbed. It punches through, and as it passes through the hull material, it interacts with the atoms in the metal. It knocks neutrons and protons loose from aluminum nuclei, creating a spray of secondary particles that scatter in all directions inside the cabin. These secondary particles, neutrons, pions, gamma rays, are themselves biologically damaging. In some cases, the secondary radiation shower is more harmful than the original particle. This is the counterintuitive nightmare of deep space radiation shielding. A study published in 2025, using data from radiation detectors aboard the uncrewed Artemis I mission, confirmed what physicists had long suspected. Standard aluminum shielding does not reliably reduce the biological radiation dose inside a spacecraft. In some configurations, it increases it. The shielding generates secondary radiation that the original cosmic ray would not have produced if it had simply passed through empty space and through the astronaut's body without hitting anything else first. The best shielding materials are hydrogen-rich, water, polyethylene, materials where the incoming particles hit small, light nuclei that absorb energy without generating heavy secondary particles. This is why some mission concepts propose surrounding the crew cabin with water tanks, using the drinking water and wastewater as radiation shielding. It is elegant in theory. It is extraordinarily heavy and complex in practice. The Artemis II crew flew with 6 active radiation sensors deployed at various locations inside the Orion capsule. Each crew member wore a personal dosimeter tracking their individual exposure. The data from these instruments will be compared against the Avatar organ chips to create the first complete picture of deep space radiation exposure and its biological effects on human tissue in over 50 years. But we already know, from decades of research on Earth and in low Earth orbit, what radiation does to the body organ by organ, and the picture is grim. Start with the brain. Cosmic rays kill neurons. They trigger neuroinflammation, a chronic state of immune activation in the brain that damages healthy tissue. Animal studies using simulated galactic cosmic ray environments have demonstrated measurable cognitive decline in mice and rats after exposure. The animals showed increased anxiety, impaired memory, reduced ability to learn new tasks, and changes in social behavior. Some researchers have described the effects as resembling the early stages of neurodegenerative disease. The implications for a crew on a 30-month Mars mission are deeply concerning. If cosmic rays degrade cognitive function progressively over months and years, the crew making life or death decisions at the end of the mission may not be thinking as clearly as the crew that launched at the beginning. Move to the heart. Radiation damages the endothelial cells that line the interior surfaces of blood vessels. These cells regulate blood flow, prevent clotting, and maintain the structural integrity of the vascular system. When they are damaged, the risk of cardiovascular disease increases. Studies of Apollo astronauts, who are the only humans other than the Artemis II crew to have traveled beyond the Van Allen belts, showed elevated rates of cardiovascular events compared to astronauts who flew only in low Earth orbit. The sample size is small. Only 24 humans flew to the moon during Apollo, but the trend is consistent with what radiation biology predicts. The eyes are particularly vulnerable. Radiation accelerates cataract formation by damaging the lens proteins that must remain perfectly transparent for clear vision. Apollo astronauts reported a strange phenomenon during their flights. They saw flashes of light, brief streaks and sparkles in their visual field, even with their eyes closed. These were not hallucinations. They were cosmic rays striking their retinas. When a high-energy particle passes through the retina, it deposits enough energy to trigger the photoreceptor cells, creating the perception of light where there is none. The astronauts were literally seeing radiation hit them. The reproductive system faces risks that extend beyond the individual astronaut. Radiation can damage the DNA in sperm and egg cells, creating mutations that could be passed to future generations. For a species planning to establish permanent settlements on other worlds, this is not an abstract concern. If the radiation environment of Mars or deep space transit damages the reproductive cells of colonists, the genetic health of the first generation born off Earth could be compromised before they are even conceived. This is one of the most profound and least studied implications of long-duration spaceflight. During the Artemis II mission, the crew also assembled and tested an emergency radiation shelter inside the Orion capsule. If a solar storm had erupted during their journey, the sun can blast out enormous clouds of energetic particles called coronal mass ejections that would flood the spacecraft with radiation far exceeding the normal galactic cosmic ray background. The crew practiced building a shelter from onboard supplies, stacking equipment bags, water containers, and other materials around a protected area of the cabin to create a makeshift shield. It was a planned exercise, a rehearsal for future longer missions where a solar storm could be a life-threatening event. But here is the hard truth that no shelter can address. You can hide from solar storms. You can build walls of water and polyethylene and reduce the dose from a coronal mass ejection. But you cannot hide from galactic cosmic rays. They are everywhere. They come from every direction. They never stop. They have been streaming through the galaxy since the first stars exploded, and they will continue long after our sun burns out. They are the background noise of the universe, and that noise passes through everything, including the bodies of every human who ventures beyond the magnetic cradle of Earth. Radiation is the one problem without a clean solution. You can exercise to save your bones. You can wear compression garments to manage your blood pressure. You can take medications to address some of the fluid shift effects, but you cannot exercise away radiation damage. You cannot compress your way out of a shattered chromosome. The further you go from Earth, and the longer you stay, the more damage accumulates. Cell by cell, gene by gene, a slow rewriting of the biological code that keeps you alive. And the body has one more vulnerability that we have not discussed yet. One that does not show up on radiation sensors or bone density scans or eye examinations. One that is invisible to every medical instrument on board. It is the vulnerability of the mind. Because the human brain evolved not just for one gravity and one atmosphere, but for one social and sensory environment. An environment of faces and voices and touch and sunlight, and the knowledge that help is nearby. Remove all of that, and the mind begins to fracture in ways that no amount of physical conditioning can prevent. Chapter 9. The Mind Breaks First. On April 6, 2026, the Artemis II crew flew behind the far side of the moon, and for approximately 40 minutes, they disappeared. Not metaphorically. They disappeared from every communication network on Earth. The moon, 2,160 miles in diameter, solid rock, positioned itself directly between the Orion spacecraft and every antenna. Every satellite, every signal relay on or around Earth. Complete radio silence. No voice contact, no data link, no telemetry. Nothing. For those 40 minutes, Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen were the most isolated human beings in the history of our species. 252,760 miles from Earth, with the entire mass of the moon blocking any signal that could reach them. If something had gone wrong during those 40 minutes, if a system had failed, if a medical emergency had occurred, no one on Earth would have known, and no one on Earth could have helped. This was planned. It was expected. The crew had trained for it. They knew exactly when the loss of signal would occur and exactly when it would end. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally are two very different things. When the radio went silent, when the data link dropped, when the last signal from Earth faded to static and then to nothing, the crew was alone in a way that no human being has been alone since the Apollo era. And they were farther away than any Apollo crew had ever been. Now, extrapolate this to Mars. A crew on Mars would not experience a 40-minute communication blackout. They would experience a permanent communication delay. At its closest approach, Mars is about 34 million miles from Earth. At its farthest, over 250 million miles. Radio signals travel at the speed of light, which means a message from Earth to Mars takes between 4 and 24 minutes, depending on orbital positions. A question asked by an astronaut on Mars would not receive an answer for at least 8 minutes, and possibly as long as 48 minutes, round trip. Real-time conversation would be impossible. This means that a crew on Mars would be making every decision alone. Medical emergencies, equipment failures, interpersonal conflicts, psychological crises. There would be no calling Houston for guidance, no real-time consultation with flight surgeons, no talking through a problem with the team on the ground while the problem is happening. The crew would have to be self-sufficient in a way that no human expedition has ever been. NASA understands this. That is why they launched the Capsule 2 mission in October 2025. CHAPIA stands for Crew Health and Performance Exploration Analog. It places 4 volunteer crew members inside a Mars-simulated habitat at Johnson Space Center in Houston for 378 days. They live under simulated Mars conditions, including communication delays, resource limitations, and isolation from the outside world. The goal is to study the behavioral and psychological effects of long-duration confinement before committing real crews to real missions. The Artemis II crew participated in a related study called ARCA. It uses wearable wristbands that track sleep patterns, stress levels, cognitive performance, and teamwork dynamics in real time. This is the first time such continuous behavioral monitoring has been conducted in deep space. The data will establish the first psychological baseline for crews operating beyond Earth orbit, informing mission planners about how stress, isolation, and the deep space environment affect human behavior and decision-making. But we already have data from closer to home, and it is not encouraging. Astronauts on the International Space Station experience a uniquely disorienting circadian environment. The station orbits Earth every 90 minutes. That means the crew sees 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every 24 hours. Their bodies, evolved to synchronize with a single daily light-dark cycle, cannot track the rapid alternation. Circadian rhythms disrupt, melatonin production becomes erratic, sleep architecture changes, meaning the proportions and timing of deep sleep, REM sleep, and light sleep shift in measurable ways. Astronauts on the station report chronic fatigue, difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, and a persistent sense of never feeling fully rested. Cortisol levels, the hormone associated with stress, rise during spaceflight. Social behaviors change. Some astronauts withdraw. They become quieter, less communicative, less engaged with their crewmates. In rare cases, depressive episodes have been documented, and these effects occur in low Earth orbit, where the crew can see Earth filling their windows, where they can video call their families, where rescue is possible within hours, and where resupply ships arrive every few months with fresh food and personal packages from home. Remove all of that, and the psychological landscape becomes far more hostile. The Mars 500 study, conducted between 2010 and 2011, attempted to simulate a Mars mission on Earth. 6 volunteers were sealed inside a simulated spacecraft in Moscow for 520 days. They followed a simulated mission timeline, including a pretend Mars landing and surface activities. The study produced troubling results. At least one crew member developed a chronic sleep disorder that persisted throughout the mission. Another showed signs of depression. The crew fractured into subgroups, with some members forming alliances and others becoming socially isolated. Communication patterns broke down, motivation declined. And the critical caveat is that the Mars 500 crew could quit at any time. They knew they were in Moscow. They knew that outside the habitat walls, normal life continued. A real Mars crew would have no such safety net. There would be no quitting. There would be no early return. The knowledge that you are genuinely trapped, that the physics of orbital mechanics will not allow you to go home for over a year, even if everything goes wrong, adds a psychological dimension that no ground-based simulation can replicate. Christina Koch, one of the Artemis II crew members, holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman. She spent 328 days on the International Space Station between 2019 and 2020. Her experience is the closest analog we have to what a Mars crew would face psychologically. She has spoken about the challenge of maintaining motivation and emotional balance over months in a confined environment, about the importance of routine and purpose, about the small rituals that help you hold on to a sense of normalcy when nothing around you is normal. But even Koch's record-setting mission was fundamentally different from Mars. She could see Earth. She could call her family. She could receive care packages. She knew that rescue was possible. On Mars, none of those lifelines exist. Now let us run our thought experiment one more time. What if we sent the Artemis II crew to Mars, not for 10 days, for 30 months? Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen, sealed in a habitat the size of a small apartment. 7 months of transit in 0G, 12 to 14 months, on the surface at 0.38 G. 7 months of transit back. Communication delays of up to 24 minutes each way. No possibility of rescue. No fresh food after the first few months. No new faces. No new places to go. The same 4 people, the same walls, the same recycled air, the same view out, the same windows, for 2.5 years. The body would deteriorate. We have covered that extensively. But the mind might break first, and if the mind breaks, the body does not matter. A crew member who becomes depressed, paranoid, or psychologically withdrawn is a liability to the entire mission. A crew member who cannot sleep is a crew member who makes mistakes. A crew member who conflicts with others in a 4-person team can fracture the social cohesion that keeps everyone alive. The Artemis II crew chose this life. They trained for 3 years. They knew the risks. They accepted them willingly. But here is what nobody warned them about. something so basic and so physical that it catches every returning astronaut off guard. The moment they step back onto Earth, their bodies will reject the very gravity they evolved in. Standing up will make them dizzy. Walking in a straight line with their eyes closed will be impossible. And their necks will ache from the simple act of holding up their own heads, because after 10 days without gravity, even the weight of a human skull feels like a burden. Coming home is not a celebration. It is a physical ordeal. And for longer missions, the ordeal is much, much worse. Chapter 10. Coming home hurts. The parachutes deploy. 3 massive red and white canopies bloom against the darkening sky over the Pacific Ocean. The Orion capsule, which moments ago was screaming through the atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour, is now drifting downward at 17 miles per hour. It hits the water. The impact is firm, a jolt that snaps through the cabin and rattles every system on board. The capsule bobs in the waves, tilting and rocking. Recovery helicopters converge. Divers splash into the water. Within 2 hours, the crew will be extracted and flown to the USS John P. Murtha. Medical evaluations will begin immediately, but for the 4 people inside that capsule, the hardest part of the mission may have just started. When astronauts return to Earth after time in space, gravity hits them like a wall. The body that launched is not the body that lands. Even after just 10 days, the cardiovascular system has begun adapting to microgravity. The heart, which no longer had to pump blood upward against gravity, has started to atrophy. Blood volume has decreased because in microgravity the body interprets the upward fluid shift as excess fluid and begins shedding it. The baroreceptor reflex, the automatic system that adjusts your blood pressure when you stand up, has dulled from disuse. The result is a condition called post-flight orthostatic intolerance. When the astronaut tries to stand, blood pressure drops catastrophically. The cardiovascular system, weakened and deconditioned, cannot push enough blood to the brain against the full force of Earth's gravity. The astronaut feels lightheaded. Their vision narrows. They sway on their feet, and if they do not sit or lie down immediately, they faint. After months in space, many astronauts cannot stand without assistance. Some cannot stand at all. Jasmine Mogbelli, who flew on Crew 7 and returned in 2024, described feeling unsteady and reported that her neck fatigued simply from the weight of her own head. Think about that. The human head weighs roughly 10 to 12 pounds. After months in microgravity, the neck muscles that hold up that weight have weakened so significantly that the simple act of keeping your head upright becomes exhausting. Andreas Mogensen, the European Space Agency astronaut who returned from an extended station mission, could not walk a straight line with his eyes closed after landing. His vestibular system, the balance mechanism in his inner ear, had recalibrated for microgravity. On Earth, with his eyes closed, he had no reliable sense of which way was up. The inner ear that had adapted to weightlessness could not readapt to gravity fast enough. He staggered, stumbled, and could not maintain a straight path. Don Pettit, at 70 years old, the oldest active astronaut in NASA's core, returned after 220 days on the International Space Station. He joked afterward that his primary re-entry activity was emptying his stomach onto the steppes of Kazakhstan. The nausea that many astronauts experience during re-entry and immediately after landing is the vestibular system screaming. It had learned a new normal in space. Gravity was not part of that normal. The sudden return to 1G is a sensory assault that overwhelms the brain's ability to process spatial information. Suni Williams, who returned from an extended mission in 2025 after months longer than planned on the International Space Station, said that despite being a veteran astronaut with multiple prior flights, she was still shocked by how harsh gravity felt on return. Every previous experience of landing had not prepared her for the sheer physical brutality of gravity after extended weightlessness. The Artemis II crew has been in space for only 10 days. Short enough that severe deconditioning is unlikely, but long enough for noticeable effects. Their inner ears will need time to readjust. Their blood pressure regulation will be slightly impaired. Their muscles will feel weak and heavy. The simple act of walking across the deck of the recovery ship will require concentration and effort that would be unconscious on a normal day. Post-mission medical evaluations will check for blood pressure stability when they move from lying down to sitting to standing. Their eyes will be imaged for any early signs of the neuroocular changes we discussed earlier. Their blood will be drawn to check for elevated calcium, markers of bone breakdown, and signs of radiation damage. Their vestibular function will be tested with balance assessments. And all of this data, every blood sample, every eye scan, every balance test, will be compared against the baseline measurements taken 6 months before launch as part of the standardized measures study. But here is what the public rarely hears about: the recovery timeline. Because most people assume that astronauts land, feel a bit wobbly for a day or two, and then return to normal. The reality is far more complex. Most spaceflight-induced changes do reverse within 6 months. Gene expression patterns that shifted during spaceflight gradually normalize. The gut microbiome, which changes dramatically in microgravity as the bacterial populations in the digestive system respond to altered diet, stress, and radiation, largely recovers. Body weight stabilizes. Most telomere changes reverse, but some changes do not recover. The NASA twins study found that 7% of Scott Kelly's gene expression remained altered 6 months after his return from 340 days in space. Some of these genes are involved in DNA repair and immune function. Whether they ever return to baseline or represent permanent spaceflight scars is still being studied. His telomere profile shifted permanently toward a greater proportion of short telomeres, which are associated with accelerated aging and increased disease risk. Chromosomal inversions, structural rearrangements in the DNA where segments of chromosomes have been flipped or relocated, were detected after spaceflight and did not resolve. These are the kind of genetic alterations that can predispose cells to cancer. Carotid artery thickening, a marker of cardiovascular aging, was observed and persisted. Subtle cognitive changes, measured through standardized testing, lingered for months, and the eye changes. For some astronauts, the structural deformations caused by SANS, the flattening of the globe, the choroidal folds, the refractive shifts, persist indefinitely after return to Earth. The eye was reshaped by pressure in space, and it does not fully reshape back. The astronaut lives with permanently altered vision, a souvenir from orbit that no amount of time on Earth can erase. The Artemis II crew will recover from their 10-day mission quickly. Within a few weeks, most of them will feel physically normal. The brief duration of their flight limits the severity of deconditioning. But the data collected from their bodies, the blood draws, the eye scans, the radiation measurements, the organ chip analysis, will inform NASA's understanding of what happens on longer missions. Artemis II is a proof of concept. Artemis III will put boots on the moon. And eventually, a crew will launch for Mars and face 30 months of the deterioration that Artemis II experienced in 10 days. When that Mars crew returns, assuming they return, the recovery process will not be measured in weeks. It will be measured in months, possibly years. Some of the damage may never heal. And the astronauts who make that journey will return to Earth as fundamentally different biological organisms than the ones who left. But there is an even more provocative question lurking behind the recovery data. What about the humans who do not come back? What about the first generation born off Earth? Children who grow up at 0.38 G on Mars or 0.17 G on the Moon. Children whose bones and hearts and eyes develop in a gravitational environment that no human has ever experienced during childhood. Children who might look out a window at Earth hanging in the sky and know, with absolute certainty, that they can never go there. Because if they did, the gravity of their ancestors' home planet would break them. Chapter 11. The children who can never come home. Imagine a child born on Mars, not in a science fiction novel, not in a distant theoretical future, in the lifetime of people alive today. If current plans hold, humans will reach Mars within the next 2 decades, and once we establish a permanent settlement, children will eventually be born there. It is inevitable if the settlement is to survive beyond the first generation. That child would take its first breath in an artificial atmosphere, a pressurized habitat pumping oxygen and nitrogen into a sealed environment surrounded by a planet with almost no breathable air. It would take its first steps at 0.38 g. It would grow up in a world where a tennis ball thrown across a room seems to float in slow motion, where jumping off a table feels gentle and soft, where running feels like flying. Mars gravity would be the only gravity this child has ever known, and every system in that child's developing body would calibrate to 0.38 g. Bones grow and strengthen in response to mechanical stress. On Earth, every step you take sends a signal through your skeletal system telling your bones to maintain their density and strength. At 0.38 g, those steps would transmit less than half the force. The child's bones would develop to be lighter and thinner, optimized for Martian gravity, structurally adequate for the demands placed on them on Mars, but catastrophically insufficient for Earth. The heart develops in response to the demands placed on it. On Earth, the heart must pump blood upward against 1 g of gravity. This requires a muscular wall of a specific thickness and a specific strength. At 0.38 g, the demands are lower. The heart does not need to be as strong. A child's heart developing on Mars would grow smaller and thinner-walled than an Earth heart, because it would never face the full gravitational load that an Earth heart encounters every second of every day. Muscles would follow the same pattern. The legs, the core, the neck muscles that hold up the head, all of them would develop to the minimum necessary for Mars, strong enough for 0.38 g, perhaps barely adequate for 0.5 g, nowhere near sufficient for 1 g. If that child, at the age of 20, boarded a spacecraft and traveled to Earth, the experience could be devastating. The 2.6 times increase in gravity would hit them like a wall of invisible force. Their weight would more than double. Their bones, calibrated for Mars, would be at severe risk of fracture. Their heart, sized for Martian demands, would struggle to pump blood against the full pull of Earth's gravity. Standing upright might cause immediate blood pressure collapse. Walking could stress their skeletal system to the breaking point. Running could shatter their legs. A child born on Mars might never be able to visit the planet where their species evolved. They would be exiles from Earth, not by choice, but by biology. And we have zero data on any of this. None. All of our understanding of human development is based on bodies growing at 1 g. Every medical textbook, every growth chart, every standard for bone density and cardiac function and muscle development is calibrated to Earth gravity. We have some data on what happens to adult bodies in 0 g, thanks to the International Space Station. But we have no data on what happens to developing bodies in partial gravity. There have been no studies on mammalian development at 0.38 g or 0.17 g. Rodent reproduction experiments on the International Space Station have produced mixed results in 0 g, with some studies showing developmental abnormalities and others showing surprising resilience. But 0 g is not Mars gravity, and rodents are not humans. The questions multiply when you think about them. How does the vestibular system develop in a child who has never experienced 1 g? Would their sense of balance be permanently calibrated to Mars, making them helplessly disoriented on Earth? How does the visual system develop when the eyeballs are forming under Martian intracranial pressure, which would be different from Earth due to the altered fluid dynamics of lower gravity? Could children born on Mars develop a variant of spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome simply from growing up at the wrong gravity? And then there is the deeper question, the evolutionary question. If humans settle Mars permanently, natural selection will begin operating differently. Traits that are advantageous on Earth may be neutral or even disadvantageous on Mars. And traits that are irrelevant on Earth may become critical on Mars. Over generations, the selective pressures of a different gravitational environment, a different radiation environment, a different atmospheric pressure, and a different set of physical demands would begin shaping the Martian population differently from the Earth population. Lighter bones would be selected for because they require less metabolic energy to maintain and are sufficient. For Martian gravity, smaller hearts might be advantageous for the same reason. Larger lungs could be favored because the atmospheric pressure inside Martian habitats might be kept lower than Earth's sea level pressure to reduce the engineering demands on habitat seals and walls. Larger heads might develop because lower gravity places less constraint on cranial size during development. This is not science fiction. This is basic evolutionary biology applied to a novel environment. Given enough time, enough generations, and enough selective pressure, two populations of the same species living in different environments will diverge. They will develop different physical characteristics, different physiological capabilities, different anatomical proportions. The timeline for significant divergence is uncertain. It could take thousands of years. It could take tens of thousands. But the direction is inevitable. At some point, Mars humans and Earth humans would be different enough that the differences are visible, different enough that they cannot comfortably live in each other's environments, and potentially, given enough time, different enough that reproductive compatibility is affected. Two branches of the human family tree, separated not by an ocean or a mountain range, but by 50 million miles of vacuum and a difference of 0.62 g. Now, let us make it more extreme. What if the Artemis II crew had children on the Moon? The Moon's gravity is 0.17 g, less than half of Mars. A child developing at 0.17 g would have dramatically underdeveloped musculoskeletal systems compared to an Earth child. Their bones would be thinner than paper in comparison to Earth standards. Their hearts would be small and weak by any terrestrial measure. Their muscles would have none of the robust density that Earth gravity builds. If such a child ever traveled to Earth, the consequences could be fatal. Not injurious, fatal. Their cardiovascular system might simply be incapable of sustaining blood flow to the brain at 1 g. And consider the sensory dimension. A child raised on the Moon would grow up seeing Earth as a blue marble hanging in the black sky. They would never feel rain. They would never hear birdsong. They would never feel wind on their skin or grass beneath their feet. They would never experience the sensory richness that every Earth child absorbs without thinking about it. The smells, the textures, the sounds, the thermal variations of a living planet. The sensory environment of a lunar habitat would be sterile by comparison. Recycled air, artificial light, controlled temperature. The same walls, the same rooms, the same limited spaces, every day for their entire childhood. What does that do to a developing brain? We do not know. Sensory deprivation studies on Earth suggest that the brain requires rich, varied input during development to wire itself correctly. Children raised in environments with limited sensory stimulation show measurable differences in cognitive development, emotional regulation, and social behavior. A lunar childhood would not be sensory deprivation in the clinical sense, but it would be sensory limitation on a scale no human child has ever experienced. We have been talking about what space does to the human body as if it is a problem to be solved. Exercise more, shield better, develop drugs, wear compression garments, and all of those approaches have merit. They might save the first generation, but they do not address the fundamental question. The human body, as it exists right now, is a product of 200,000 years of evolution in one specific environment. We are taking it to environments that violate every parameter it was designed for. We can patch and compensate and countermeasure, but at some point we have to ask whether the patches are enough. whether the body itself needs to change, not through evolution over millennia, but through deliberate engineering. Now, before we go, Chapter 12. Engineering the astronaut. Since the beginning of human spaceflight, we have approached the problem of surviving in space the same way. We build a bubble of Earth around the astronaut, a pressurized cabin with breathable air, temperature control, radiation shielding as best we can manage, exercise equipment to slow the deterioration, and then we hope the body holds together long enough to get home. Every solution we have relied on is external. We change the environment around the body. We have never changed the body itself, but that is about to change. Let us start with the most obvious solution to the most fundamental problem: artificial gravity. The concept is simple. Spin the spacecraft. The rotation creates centrifugal force that pushes the occupants outward against the wall of the spinning structure, simulating the sensation of gravity. The faster the spin and the larger the radius, the closer the simulated gravity comes to Earth normal. The physics have been understood since long before spaceflight began. The engineering is straightforward, and yet no crewed spacecraft has ever flown with an artificial gravity system. The minimum comfortable radius for a spinning habitat is generally estimated at 12 to 24 meters, rotating at roughly 4 to 6 revolutions per minute. Below that radius, the Coriolis effect becomes noticeable. Objects do not fall straight down. They curve slightly as they drop, because different parts of the spinning structure are moving at different speeds. At very small radii, the difference in simulated gravity between your head and your feet becomes significant, creating nausea and disorientation. The spinning structure needs to be large enough that the human body cannot easily detect the rotation. NASA has tested the concept only once in any meaningful way. During the 1998 Neurolab shuttle mission, astronauts used a short-radius centrifuge aboard the shuttle. Even brief exposures to just 0.5 G for 20 minutes every other day showed measurable reduction in cardiovascular deconditioning compared to astronauts who did not use the centrifuge. The data was encouraging. Even partial gravity for short periods could significantly slow the body's deterioration. But translating that into a full-scale spinning habitat for a Mars transit vehicle is an engineering challenge of enormous scale and cost. The spinning module would be the single most expensive component of any Mars mission. It would need to be large, structurally robust, and precisely balanced to avoid vibrations that could damage other systems. It would need to accommodate the crew's living quarters, meaning everything from sleeping berths to hygiene facilities to food preparation would need to function in a rotating environment. Docking with other spacecraft or modules would be complicated because the spinning section would need to be despun or connected through a rotating junction. Every added complexity increases mass, cost, and risk. Scott Kelly himself has said that artificial gravity will be essential for missions beyond Mars. The body simply cannot sustain years of zero-G transit without some form of gravitational countermeasure. Exercise alone is not enough. Compression garments are not enough. The body needs gravity, even partial gravity, to maintain its fundamental structures. But artificial gravity only solves the mechanical problem. It does nothing about radiation. For that, we need to go deeper, into the cells themselves. Pharmaceutical countermeasures are being actively researched. Heat shock proteins, a class of molecules that cells produce under stress to protect their internal structures, are upregulated in microgravity. Researchers are investigating drugs that could boost heat shock protein activity, potentially protecting cells against the damage caused by both microgravity and radiation. If a pill could keep bone-building cells active in zero-G, the rate of bone loss might be dramatically reduced. Other pharmaceutical approaches target the osteoclasts directly, the cells that break down bone. Bisphosphonates, drugs commonly used on Earth to treat osteoporosis, have been tested in space with some success. But long-term use of bisphosphonates carries its own risks, including rare but serious side effects like jawbone deterioration and atypical fractures. Finding a medication that can be taken safely for years during a Mars mission is a challenge that has not been met. And then there is the frontier that makes both pharmaceutical approaches and exercise regimens look primitive by comparison. Genetic modification. CRISPR-based gene editing has advanced rapidly in the last decade. The technology allows researchers to make precise changes to DNA, adding, removing, or altering specific genes with a level of accuracy that would have been science fiction 20 years ago. In the context of spaceflight, the possibilities are profound and deeply controversial. Could we edit astronaut genomes to enhance radiation resistance? Some organisms on Earth possess extraordinary resistance to radiation. The bacterium Deinococcus radiodurans can survive thousands of times the radiation dose that would kill a human, thanks to highly efficient DNA repair mechanisms. The tardigrade, a microscopic animal found in nearly every environment on Earth, can survive radiation levels, vacuum exposure, and temperature extremes that would destroy most life. Understanding the genetic basis of these abilities and potentially incorporating them into human biology is within the realm of theoretical possibility. Could we modify the pathways that regulate bone density to prevent loss in microgravity? Could we alter the genes that control cardiovascular adaptation to maintain heart size and function regardless of gravitational loading? Could we modify the TMAO pathway, a biochemical system that deep-sea fish use to protect their cellular structures against crushing pressure, and repurpose it for human use in high-pressure environments like Venus's cloud layer or deep ocean habitats? The Avatar organ-on-a-chip experiment flying on Artemis II represents a step toward this kind of personalized medicine. By testing how each individual astronaut's cells respond to deep space conditions, researchers can begin to identify which genetic factors make some people more resilient to spaceflight effects and which make others more vulnerable. This is precision medicine applied to space. Instead of a one-size-fits-all approach to crew health, future missions could tailor countermeasures to each astronaut's specific genetic profile. An astronaut whose cells show high vulnerability to radiation-induced DNA damage might receive different protective treatments than one whose cells repair radiation damage efficiently. But the ethical questions are staggering. If we modify astronauts to survive Mars, are they still the same species? If those modifications are heritable, meaning they are passed to the astronauts' children, have we deliberately started a new branch of human evolution? Not through natural selection operating over thousands of generations, but through deliberate choice, made in a laboratory, in a single generation. On Earth, the line between treatment and enhancement is already blurry. Treating a genetic disease is widely accepted. Enhancing a healthy person's abilities raises profound ethical concerns. In the context of spaceflight, that line dissolves entirely. Radiation-resistant genes would be a medical curiosity on Earth. On Mars, they would be a survival requirement. Is it treatment to give an astronaut genes that protect against an environment they have chosen to enter? Or is it enhancement because the natural human genome does not include those capabilities? And who decides? If we require genetic modification for Mars colonists, do we create a new class of human? Do we establish biological prerequisites for citizenship on another planet? Do we divide the species not by geography or culture, but by genotype? These questions are not urgent today. The technology is not ready. The ethical frameworks are not developed. The missions are not yet planned in enough detail to require answers, but they are coming. They are coming as surely as the Artemis program is building toward Artemis III and then toward Mars. And when they arrive, they will force us to confront something fundamental about what it means to be human. Whether we define ourselves by our biology, by our identity, or by something that transcends both, there is one more option we have not discussed, one that does not require changing the body or the environment. one that changes the very concept of what it means to explore space with a human presence. And it raises the most philosophical question of all. Chapter 13. The body you do not need. What if you could skip the body entirely? Not abandon it, not leave it behind, but put it to sleep, slow it down to a whisper, reduce its metabolism to a fraction of normal, cool it, quiet it, suspend it in a state between waking and oblivion where the biological clock nearly stops and the damage from radiation, from bone loss, from muscle atrophy, from psychological deterioration slows to a trickle. This is therapeutic torpor, medically induced hibernation, and NASA has funded research into making it real. The concept draws from a biological phenomenon that already exists in nature. Bears hibernate for months, reducing their metabolic rate dramatically. Their hearts slow, their body temperature drops. They do not eat, drink, or eliminate waste. And when they wake in spring, their bones have not deteriorated. Their muscles have not wasted. Their cardiovascular systems function normally. Somehow, the hibernating body protects itself from the damage that would destroy a human in the same conditions. Humans are not natural hibernators. Our bodies do not have the built-in mechanisms that bears use to survive months of metabolic suppression. But medicine has discovered ways to approximate the state. Therapeutic hypothermia, the deliberate cooling of the body to temperatures around 32 to 34 degrees Celsius, is already used in hospitals to protect the brain after cardiac arrest and traumatic injury. Patients have been maintained in mild hypothermia for days, with beneficial results. The cooled body needs less oxygen, less fuel, less everything. Cellular damage slows, inflammation decreases. The body enters a kind of biological pause. SpaceWorks Enterprises designed a torpor habitat concept for NASA that would keep Mars-bound astronauts in a hibernation-like state for the majority of the transit. The crew would be cooled, sedated, and maintained on intravenous nutrition, while automated systems manage the spacecraft. The concept could reduce crew consumables, food, water, and oxygen by 50 to 70%. It would dramatically shrink the size and mass of the crew habitat. It would reduce radiation exposure because cells that are not actively dividing are less vulnerable to radiation-induced mutations. And it would eliminate the psychological burden of months of conscious confinement. The challenges are significant. No human has been maintained in therapeutic torpor for more than a few days. The risks include cardiac arrhythmia, blood clots, immune system suppression, and muscle contractures. Waking from torpor is not like waking from sleep. It requires careful rewarming, monitoring, and medical support. If something goes wrong while the crew is in torpor, there may be no one awake to fix it. But the concept is being taken seriously. It is being studied, it is being refined, and if it works, it changes the calculus of interplanetary travel completely. You would not need to solve the bone loss problem, or the muscle atrophy problem, or the psychological isolation problem for the transit phase. You would sleep through it. Your body, slowed to a metabolic crawl, would arrive at Mars in roughly the same condition it left Earth. The mission would begin not after 7 months of zero-G deterioration, but after 7 months of biological pause. The crew would wake up on arrival, physically intact, mentally fresh, ready to work. But torpor is not the only way to bypass the body's limitations. There are more radical options. Brain-computer interfaces could allow astronauts to control spacecraft systems directly, through neural signals, eliminating the need for manual dexterity that degrades in microgravity. If your hands are too weak to flip a switch because your muscles have atrophied, but your brain can send a command directly to the switch through an implanted electrode, does the muscle loss matter? Exoskeletons could compensate for weakened legs and backs, allowing astronauts to function normally on planetary surfaces, even with reduced muscle and bone capacity. Artificial organs, hearts that do not atrophy, kidneys that filter without being damaged by elevated calcium, could replace the biological components that space destroys. At what point does the astronaut stop being an astronaut and become something else? If 40% of your body is synthetic, if your heart is mechanical, your bones reinforced with engineered materials, your brain connected directly to your spacecraft through implanted interfaces, does the question of what space does to the human body even apply anymore? You are no longer fully human in the biological sense. You are a hybrid, a cyborg, an engineered organism designed for an environment that the natural human cannot survive. And if you can engineer a body to survive space, why send a body at all? Robotic exploration avoids every problem documented in this entire film. Robots do not lose bone. They do not develop blood clots. They do not go crazy from isolation. They do not need food or water or oxygen. They do not need to come home. A robot on Mars can work continuously for years, without rest, without complaint, without existential dread. It can be repaired, upgraded, and replaced. It does not care about radiation, because it does not have DNA to damage. It does not care about gravity, because it does not have a cardiovascular system to depress. We already have robots on Mars. The Perseverance rover has been exploring Jezero crater since 2021. It has drilled core samples, analyzed rocks, deployed the Ingenuity helicopter, and transmitted thousands of images and terabytes of data back to Earth. It has done extraordinary science. And it has done all of it without a single bone, a single muscle, a single drop of blood. So why send humans at all? The answer is not efficiency. Robots are more efficient explorers in almost every measurable way. They are cheaper, lighter, more durable, and more expendable. The answer is not even science. Although human geologists can make observations and judgments in minutes that a rover takes months to replicate, the answer is meaning. Christina Koch looked through Orion's window at Earth during the Artemis II mission and saw something that no camera, no sensor, no instrument could capture. She saw her home. She felt the emotional weight of distance. She experienced the cognitive shift that astronauts call the overview effect, the sudden visceral understanding that Earth is small, fragile, and alone in the darkness. That understanding only matters because a human was having it. A robot can take a photograph of Earth from deep space, but a robot cannot feel the vertigo of seeing everything you have ever known reduced to a blue dot. A robot cannot bring that feeling home and share it with the rest of us in a way that changes how we think about our planet and our place in the universe. Victor Glover, the Artemis II pilot, put it this way during a press conference from the spacecraft: "It does not change my belief. It absolutely reaffirms that we live on a fragile planet in the vacuum of space." Those words carry weight because a human being said them while looking at Earth from 250,000 miles away. If a robot had transmitted the same sentence, it would mean nothing. The words would be empty. The experience behind them would not exist. The value of human spaceflight is not the data. It is the consciousness that collects the data. It is the wonder that a human mind feels when it confronts something vast and incomprehensible. It is the fear, the awe, the loneliness, the gratitude. These are not scientific measurements. They are the reason science matters. Tonight, 4 human beings will fall through the atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour. Their bones will be slightly weaker than when they left. Their eyes may have begun to change shape. Their DNA carries new scars from cosmic rays that pass through them like ghosts. But they will be alive. They will be conscious. They will feel the heat and the pressure and the terror and the relief. And they will know something about the human body and the human spirit that no one else in history has ever known. That is why we send people. Not because it is easier, because it means something. Chapter 14. The Body That Dared. The Pacific Ocean is dark. A few miles off the coast of San Diego, under a sky just beginning to deepen toward night, The water catches the last light of the day and holds it. Recovery helicopters hover. Navy divers bob in the swells. The USS John P. Murtha stands ready. Medical bay prepared. Doctors waiting. And then a light appears in the sky. Not a star. Something moving. Something falling. A streak of brilliance against the dusk, a capsule wrapped in the dying glow of its own heat shield. Slowing, slowing, slowing. 3 parachutes bloom above it, enormous red and white canopies that catch the air and billow open like the breath of something immense. The capsule drifts downward, 17 miles per hour. The ocean rises to meet it, and then, with a sound that travels across the water like a closing door, it is down. Orion floats. It tilts and rocks in the gentle Pacific swell. Inside, 4 people sit strapped to their seats, breathing hard, feeling heavy. 10 days ago, they weighed what they always weighed. Right now, every pound feels like it has been doubled. Their arms are heavy, their heads are heavy, their eyelids are heavy. Gravity, the force they grew up with, the force they took for granted every day of their lives, feels alien. It feels oppressive. It feels like punishment for daring to leave. This is the paradox of coming home. The earth you love is the earth that hurts you. The gravity that kept you alive your whole life is the gravity that now feels like a cage being locked around your body. Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Jeremy Hansen. 4 people who trained for 3 years, who waited through delays and technical challenges, and a hydrogen leak and a helium issue, and 2 wet dress rehearsals, who finally launched on April 1st, 2026, who flew farther from Earth than any human beings in history, who saw the far side of the moon with their own eyes, who watched a solar eclipse from a vantage point no human has ever occupied. They are home. And their bodies are different from the bodies that left. Not dramatically different. 10 days is short. The changes are subtle. A slight decrease in cardiovascular fitness. A minor redistribution of body fluids. A small reduction in bone density in weight-bearing bones. A faint alteration in the gene expression patterns of cells that have been bathed in deep space radiation for over a week. Changes that will reverse within weeks. Changes that are manageable, measurable, and ultimately minor. But the data those changes produce is not minor. It is invaluable. Every blood sample drawn from the Artemis II crew will be analyzed and compared against their pre-flight baselines. Every eye scan will be examined for the earliest signs of the neuroocular changes that plague long-duration astronauts. Every radiation reading from the 6 sensors deployed inside Orion will be mapped against the biological data from the Avatar organ chips, creating the most detailed picture ever assembled of how deep space radiation affects living human tissue. The Arca wristband data will reveal how the crew's sleep, stress, and cognitive function fluctuated across the 10-day mission, establishing the first psychological and behavioral baseline for deep space operations. This data feeds forward. Artemis III will land astronauts on the moon. The missions that follow will build toward a permanent lunar base. And eventually, within the careers of the engineers and flight surgeons working the Artemis program today, a crew will launch for Mars. The Artemis II data will help keep that crew alive. The blood drawn tonight will inform the medications packed for a 30-month mission. The eye scans performed tomorrow will help determine whether neuroocular countermeasures need to be developed before a Mars crew commits to years beyond Earth's magnetic shield. The radiation measurements will refine the models that predict cancer risk and cognitive decline and cardiovascular damage over the duration of an interplanetary voyage. 4 bodies were the test. Billions of bodies may benefit from the results. And that brings us to the question that has been running beneath the surface of this entire documentary. The question that does not have a scientific answer. The question that belongs to philosophy, or perhaps to something deeper than philosophy. Why do we do this? The human body is a 200,000-year-old design. It was optimized through natural selection for the conditions of the African savanna. 1 g of gravity, 1 atmosphere of pressure, a narrow temperature range between freezing and perhaps 45 degrees Celsius, moderate humidity, low radiation, abundant oxygen at 21% of the atmosphere, a 24-hour light-dark cycle synchronized with the rotation of the planet. Every environment we have explored in this documentary, space, the Moon, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, the deep ocean, violates these parameters. Some violate all of them simultaneously, and the body responds the way any finely tuned machine responds when you operate it outside its specifications. It breaks, bones dissolve, eyes deform, blood flows backward, DNA shatters, the brain displaces inside the skull, the heart shrinks, the mind fractures under isolation and confinement. Every organ, every tissue, every cell in the human body is screaming the same message. You are not supposed to be here. Go home. Go back to the one place in the universe where this machine works correctly. And yet, we go anyway. The Artemis II crew accepted every risk documented in this film. They understood that their bones would weaken. They understood that their eyes might change shape. They understood that cosmic rays would pass through their bodies and leave scars in their DNA that might never heal. They understood that re-entry could kill them in 13 minutes if a single system failed. They understood all of it, and they launched anyway. They launched because the alternative, staying safe, staying home, staying within the narrow band of conditions that our bodies demand, means never finding out what else is out there. It means never setting foot on the Moon again, never reaching Mars, never knowing whether life exists in the ice-covered oceans of Europa or the methane lakes of Titan, never understanding our place in a universe so vast that light itself takes billions of years to cross it. The body is not the obstacle. It never was. The body is the vehicle. A fragile, temporary, magnificently improbable vehicle that carries consciousness from one place to another. It breaks, yes. It always breaks. Everything breaks eventually. But between the breaking and the beginning, between the launch and the landing, between the first heartbeat and the last, there is a window. A window where a human being can look through the porthole of a spacecraft and see Earth hanging in the darkness and feel something that no instrument can measure and no equation can describe. Reid Wiseman saw it. Victor Glover saw it. Christina Koch saw it. Jeremy Hansen saw it. 4 human beings, fragile and temporary and already beginning to break down, looked through a window and saw their home from 250,000 miles away. And in that moment, the weakness of their bodies did not matter. The bone loss did not matter. The radiation damage did not matter. The eye changes, the blood clots, the shrinking hearts, the dissolving skeletons, none of it mattered. Because the experience of being human in that moment, conscious, aware, awestruck, terrified, grateful, was worth everything it cost. The body that dared, that is what we are. Not the strongest organism on this planet, not the fastest, not the most durable, but the one that looked up at the sky and decided to go. The one that knew it would hurt, knew it would break, knew it might die, and went anyway, because the body is temporary. And the question of what is out there is not. Tonight, 4 bodies came home, weaker, changed, carrying data that will help the next 4 bodies go further, and the 4 after that, and the 4 after that, until someday a human body stands on a world so distant that Earth is just another star in the sky. That body will be different from ours. It might be engineered. It might be enhanced. It might be born under a different gravity, breathing a different air, seeing through eyes that have never known the sun's light unfiltered by glass and steel. But it will still be human. It will still feel wonder. It will still feel fear. And it will still look up at the sky and ask the same question that we have been asking since the first time one of our ancestors looked at the stars and felt the ache of distance. What is out there? The body that dared to find out is the body you live in right now. Handle it carefully. It is the only vehicle that can make the journey. And the journey, despite everything it costs, is worth making. If you enjoyed this deep exploration of what space, the ocean, and the planets of our solar system do to the human body, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these long investigations possible. Tell me in the comments, would you accept the physical risks of a Mars mission? Would you trade your bone density, your perfect vision, and years of your life for the chance to stand on another planet? And what should we investigate next? These are not just questions for astronauts and scientists. They are questions for all of us, because the next chapter of human exploration is being written right now. And the ink is made of everything we are willing to sacrifice to get there. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next investigation.